10:18 a.m., July 19, 1957. Nevada Test Site, Area 9, Yucca Flat. The sun already cooking the desert floor past 100 degrees, heat shimmering off the dry lake bed, and 5 men standing in short sleeves at ground zero. No helmets, no goggles, no lead aprons, staring straight up at an empty sky, waiting for a nuclear detonation directly over their heads. The aircraft carrying the weapon flew at roughly 18,500 feet, an F-89J Scorpion, a twin-engine, twin-seat interceptor that most aviation writers had already written off as a dead-end airframe by 1957. Northrop built the thing to kill Soviet bombers at high altitude, and the Air Force kept bolting stranger and stranger weapons onto it because the Scorpion couldn't outrun or outmaneuver much of anything else. The strangest of all hung under the wing that morning, an MB-1 Genie unguided nuclear air-to-air rocket carrying a 1.5 kiloton W-25 warhead. The premise sounds like a fever dream. Fire an atomic weapon into a formation of incoming Soviet bombers, detonate it in midair, and let the blast radius do what a single conventional warhead never could. Precision didn't matter, and neither did a direct hit. Just get close. The fireball and radiation pulse would handle the rest across a lethal radius of roughly 1,000 feet. The rocket had no guidance system at all. Point the aircraft, pull the trigger, and the Genie streaked away on solid fuel thrust at Mach 3.3. The warhead detonated on a preset timer. Captain Eric Hutchison piloted the Scorpion that morning. He launched the Genie, then broke hard away from the trajectory. The rocket climbed, the timer ran, and at 18,500 feet above 5 officers and 1 photographer standing on the desert floor, it detonated. The burst registered 1.7 kilotons, a compact white flash, then the shockwave rolling outward. The sound arrived seconds later, a sharp crack followed by low rolling thunder across the flat. Colonel Sidney Bruce, one of the 5 volunteers, described the blast concussion reaching them at ground level. What he told interviewers afterward amounted to this: it felt like somebody had opened a hot oven door in his face, then slammed it shut. The film survives. Declassified, widely available now. The 5 men flinch at the sound. They look at each other and laugh, shaking hands. The mushroom cloud drifts northeast behind them. If any part of this story sounds new, or if a detail surfaces that contradicts something here, drop it in the comments. A like and a subscribe keep this channel digging through the old test footage and the classified files that keep trickling out. The whole stunt had a purpose beyond spectacle, beyond proving the Genie worked. The Air Force needed to demonstrate that tactical nuclear weapons could detonate over friendly territory, over American soil, over American troops, without killing the people underneath. 5 men standing at ground zero, with their hands in their pockets, made that argument better than any classified briefing ever could. The Scorpion carried the weapon, the Genie did the killing, and 5 officers volunteered their bodies as proof that the math held up. The Scorpion killed more of its own pilots than any Soviet bomber ever did. Between 1950 and 1954, structural failures destroyed multiple airframes in flight. The wings came apart, not cracked, separated. Test pilot Charles Tucker died in February 1952 when the horizontal stabilizer on his F-89C failed during a high-speed pull-up over Edwards. The fuselage broke in half. Another F-89 disintegrated during an air show at Detroit in September 1952, scattering wreckage into the crowd. The name Scorpion came from Northrop's own designation team. The twin tail booms on the early F-89 prototype supposedly resembled a scorpion's raised tail. The production version lost the twin booms entirely, went to a conventional empennage, and looked nothing like a Scorpion at all. The name stuck anyway, but that's beside the point. What matters? The air crews called it the Flying Coffin. Congress noticed. Representative Carl Hinshaw of California read the loss figures into the congressional record in 1953 and asked Northrop directly how many more pilots had to die before the wing spar redesign reached the production line. Northrop's chief engineer, Ed Schmood, the same Schmood who designed the P-51 Mustang at North American before crossing over, pushed a reinforced wing structure through in the D model. Thicker skin panels, revised spar caps, additional riveting along the leading edge route. The fix worked. Catastrophic wing failures dropped to near zero. The Air Force had every reason to cancel the program. They almost did twice, but Air Defense Command needed an all-weather interceptor that could find Soviet bombers in the dark, in cloud cover, over Alaska and northern Canada at 40 below. The Scorpion carried the Hughes E-6 fire control system, radar and computer linked directly to the pilot's gunsight. Crude by later standards, revolutionary for 1952. No other operational interceptor in the inventory could do what the F-89 did at night in bad weather, so they kept fixing it. The C model, the D model, the H model, the J model, each one stronger and less likely to shed its wings in a 4G turn. Northrop built over 1,000 of them. The unit cost ran approximately $680,000 per airframe by the J model, which adjusted for inflation, sits around $7.4 million in today's dollars. Cheap for a nuclear-armed interceptor. A declassified ADC readiness report from 1956 uses the phrase marginally acceptable to describe the fleet's structural reliability. Their words: 4 years of wing failures, pilot funerals, and congressional hearings, and marginally acceptable, counted as progress. 52 Falcon missiles. That's what an F-89J crew needed to guarantee a kill against a single Tu-95 Bear flying straight and level in clear air. Statistically, based on the Hughes E-6's probability of kill figures from ADC's own operational testing in 1955. The Falcon carried a 7-pound warhead. The Bear's fuselage stretched 160 feet long, skinned in aluminum over steel structural members, with self-sealing fuel tanks and redundant flight controls. A 7-pound warhead might knock a hole in the wing. Might not. A flight of 50 Bears crossing the polar route toward Seattle or Detroit at 42,000 feet meant, do the math, 2,600 Falcon rounds to stop them all. A DC didn't have 2,600 Falcons in the entire inventory. One Genie solved the problem differently. The W-25 warhead produced a fireball 300 feet across and a lethal neutron radiation pulse extending roughly 1,000 feet in every direction. It needed no guidance, no proximity fuse, no terminal homing. The weapon's kill mechanism ignored aerodynamics entirely. It killed with physics. The term Weapon System 206A appears in the original Douglas procurement documents. Nobody called it that. Crews called it the ding-dong early in development, borrowed from the AIR-2 program code. Anyway, a Soviet air defense analysis from 1959, translated and declassified in 1993, estimated that American nuclear-armed interceptors reduced the required defensive fighter force by a factor of 8. Their assessment called the Genie an admission of technological failure turned into strategic advantage. The smell of ozone and scorched alkali hung over Yucca Flat for hours after Shot John. Captain Hutchison landed the Scorpion, taxied to the ramp, and shut down both Allison J-35s without saying much to anyone. The 5 volunteers drove back to Camp Mercury in an open Jeep. 4 of them developed cancer. The official position remains that the exposures fell within acceptable limits. We were told it would be completely harmless. Colonel Sidney Bruce said that in 1982, 25 years after he stood under the flash at Yucca Flat, by then he had thyroid cancer. The film from Shot John ran in newsreels, military briefings, civil defense presentations across the country for years. The Lookout Mountain Air Force Station produced it, the same classified Hollywood studio that shot and edited nearly every American nuclear test film from 1947 through 1969. The production quality was deliberate, multiple camera angles, clean audio, the 5 volunteers positioned precisely where the frame catches both their faces and the mushroom cloud behind them. This footage existed to be seen. The Department of Defense released it to television networks within 72 hours of the detonation. A declassified memo from the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, dated July 22, 1957, states the volunteer demonstration served, their phrasing, public information objectives regarding the safety of tactical nuclear operations in proximity to friendly forces, public information objectives, not scientific objectives. The radiological data took decades to surface. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency published revised dose estimates in 2001. The 5 men at Ground Zero received between 100 and 300 millirems of prompt radiation, below the annual occupational limit, even by 1957 standards. But the report notes that dose reconstruction from a single atmospheric burst carries an uncertainty factor of plus or minus 50%. The file lists external gamma exposure only. It does not address inhaled particulates from the fallout column that drifted northeast across their position in the minutes after detonation. The data either wasn't collected or wasn't retained. The records don't say which. 4 of the 5 developed cancer. Colonel Bruce, thyroid. Major John Hughes, colon, diagnosed 1979. Colonel Arthur Gruning, prostate. The photographer George Yoshitake developed stomach cancer and lymphoma. The 5th man, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Ball, died of a heart attack in 1963 before cancer screening became routine. The Veterans Administration denied radiation-related disability claims from 3 of the 4 cancer cases, citing insufficient evidence of causal connection. Yoshitaka fought his claim for 11 years before receiving partial benefits in 1996. Captain Hutchison, the pilot who actually launched the Genie, filed his post-flight report at Indian Springs Auxiliary Field that afternoon. 2 pages, standard ADC mission debrief format. Aircraft performance nominal. Weapon release nominal. No mention of the 5 men on the ground. The report concerns itself entirely with launch altitude, airspeed at release, breakaway turn radius, and time of flight to detonation. Hutchison noted a slight yaw at the moment of rocket motor ignition. The Scorpion's fire control system tracked the Genie for 4.2 seconds before losing it. He described the flash as visible even through the aircraft's tinted canopy and his own dark visor, a pulse of white light that filled the cockpit and faded in under a second. Hutchison stayed in Air Defense Command, flew F-106 Delta Darts out of McCord through the early 60s, never discussed Shotgun publicly until a reunion interview in 1988. Yoshitake talked more. In a 1995 deposition for his VA claim, he described the moment after the shockwave passed, the desert going quiet, the 5 of them looking at each other, the nervous handshakes. I volunteered because they said it needed doing. I'd volunteer again, but I'd want to read the file first. He signed the deposition, drove home to Los Angeles, and mailed a copy to his congressman.